Hey, Rini, thank you for coming in. You've got such a marvelous background in working in entrepreneurship and investments and decades of experience in technology and consumer companies. So thank you for coming in and sharing your experience and your expertise with my audience.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
So Rini, what were the inflection points in your life? And this could have been when you were 3 or 5 years old. It could have been inside, outside the family. It could have been a mentor, somebody in school, outside of school. It could be friends. It could be a series of jobs you've had, maybe courses you took, teachers. I mean, what were these three inflection points that made you who you are today?
I think I had a few very critical inflection points that I think about a lot, actually. One was my my acceptance to a specialized science high school in New York City called Stuyvesant, where for the first time I was just surrounded by incredible kids from all over New York, mostly immigrant kids, and they were smart, but they also thought that they could do whatever they wanted to do. The sky was the limit. The, that was incredibly inspiring. And it made me realize that I too could go on to do whatever I wanted to. And, I grew up in a great household with really supportive parents, but they immigrated to the US from India. And um, they, like many immigrant families, they prioritize stability. And for them, that really manifested itself in a job in engineering or medicine or law for good reason. But when I got to Stuyvesant, I realized, okay, there's a whole world of things that I could do. Um, so that was one. Another one was that after I'd gone to Berkeley for college and I studied economics. I'd initially studied biology and then I switched to economics after I spent about a year in a lab with no windows. And I realized, "Mm, this isn't for me. And when I started to study economics, I really fell in love with development economics. It was the time when Grameen Bank was big and everyone was starting to understand microfinance. Also, the Acumen Fund was really becoming mainstream. So I was inspired by those people. And I went out after I graduated to cut my teeth on Wall Street because my analysis of those organizations was really that all the people on the top, the people who were really driving forces, they all had business backgrounds, traditional business backgrounds. So I thought there was something to that. And I went to work on Wall Street for a number of years in the hedge fund industry and then in private markets. There was a period of time where I allocated at a large family office, and I met with many times. We were very fortunate, and I noticed that many of these funds were investing privately across all of these quote unquote impact industries, um, but they would all avoid food systems, which contributed to a third of greenhouse gas emissions. And that was another moment for me where I realized, okay, these people are all really inspiring, doing incredible work, but they're avoiding something. And I loved it. I loved the fact that they thought it was too hard to do or it wasn't worth doing for a reason. And so I spent time exploring it on my own and deciding, oh, I think they're wrong. I think there's something incredible and there's a huge opportunity to modernizing the food system that benefits um, the people and planet, and it's going to do well and do good. So I think that kind of goes back to my kind of combination of Stuyvesant and thinking I could do anything I wanted. I didn't have to follow a well-worn path. And at Berkeley, where I really fell in love with development economics, where you did well and you did good.
So that's really interesting. So you come from a family of immigrants, and of course, immigrant families typically stress things like hard work, getting good education. As you mentioned, it could be like medicine, law, something that's really considered stable and perhaps more mainstream, sort of classical areas. You had the good fortune of being able to go to one of the top high schools in the country, which emphasizes this idea that you could be anything. And of course, the education is kind of like first class. It's a very elite school, quite famous. And then you end up going to a very prestigious university, Berkeley. You had an interest in things like biology, but you get stuck in a lab and you're thinking, I don't want to spend my life without windows. And you got into this idea of sort of impact, sustainable economics, development economics. And from there, you made your way to Wall Street because you thought the sort of the intersection of all of this with business. And you also got into this family office where you could see investments made in impact. But you thought, you know what, there is a really focus in food, and food is such an important part of the ecosystem. And so that guided you into what you're doing now. And this is so very thoughtful investing and adapting in the global food security marketplace, I guess, in ag tech. And so can you talk about what caused you to be a founding GP of Rethink Food? And I could see the journey. I could see the impact journey. I could see the curiosity. I could see elements of the science interest that you had early on, but then converted it into business and investment. So food is a big focus, right, of Rethink Food. So
the reason I wanted to be a founding GP was because I had run funds before, so I felt strongly that I would be a good manager of capital. And I also didn't see the fund that I thought the world needed to invest in the companies that were really revolutionizing the industry. So I wanted to create that. And at Rethink Food, we not only invest in food, but we invest in the entire food system. And that is everything from how we grow our food, how we make it, how we ship it, how we pack it, how we sell it, and how it's used. So I will give examples. We'll invest in places like a category called precision agriculture, where you're using data and autonomy and robotics to grow. And that allows us to grow our food more efficiently with arguably a lot less chemical intensity. So it's better for you. But we will also invest all the way at the other end of the spectrum in categories like food as medicine and understanding how bacteria behave in your gut biome to give you a sense of health and satiety and immunity, because it's all related. So we really zoom out and look at the entire system. And I didn't see a fund really doing that. And I think they're all interrelated. I wanted to use my background in technology investing, because I had spent 15 years investing in technologies and disruptive technologies, from, camera phones to solar to enterprise SaaS, and partner with some remarkable luminaries in the food industry so that we could have that combination of disruptive technology and also operating expertise, scale operating expertise. So my co-GP, his name is Brad Jakeman. So he co-founded the fund with me, and Brad was the president of Global Beverages at Pepsi. And then we brought some incredible luminaries onto rethink food. Indra Nooyi, who was the CEO of Pepsi, Steve Ells, who is the founder and CEO of Chipotle, Dean Banks, who is the CEO of Tyson. And these are all very scaled companies that operated across the world. So they can help our founders that we invest in today think about, how am I going to scale around the world? But they also were the acquirers, the ones being disrupted, the ones looking behind their shoulder and saying, who's doing what? And how do I stay ahead of them? Or how do I work with them? And so they know where the cracks in the system are. And that is another very, very critical thing for disruptive technologies to be able to grow quickly.
So you've got a great partner. You've got a great advisory group within your fund who are at the top of the food chain, in a sense, of food, in terms of acquisition, understanding, the mechanics, the process, the distribution, the growing, the sourcing, the consumption of food, and also would be ahead of the curve in terms of what's really disruptive and catalytic in the ag tech food marketplace. So when you make an investment, then are you looking for things that are really early or mid, or like Series A or pre-Series A? I don't think you'll go seed, right? Maybe that's a little bit too early for you.
That's a little too early for us. Well, we want to be able to use the team that we have to their maximum. So our team really understands scale. And we like to see companies that are either at the line of sight to revenue or early in revenue for the most part. And so I would describe that as Series A plus or minus. If we invest in a seed company, it's usually at a late seed stage, but we'll also invest in a Series B company, because if we're investing across the full food system, we're investing across different types of technologies. So we're not just a software fund. We invest in software companies, we invest in robotics companies, we invest in biotechnology companies, we invest in data companies, and they take different periods of time to mature.
Because you operate in the later rounds as well, then that means you must have a fairly substantial fund, because the capital, the rounds are much higher, and food could take significant capital to scale in many ways. So it sounds like you're a lead investor in the earlier stages. You probably are co-investing with other people, because your advisory group and your partner has such great, and you yourself have such great relationship networks. You were able to bring in other co-investors to scale from a finance capital standpoint, but also maybe in the use of the technology or the different areas that you're investing in. Is that how it works? Or
You're right, Stephen. That's exactly how it works. So with earlier stage companies, you will see us lead deals, and with some early growth stage companies or mid stage companies, you will see us in the syndicate. But in almost all cases, you will see us have an incredibly close relationship with the management and the board, because we are not just bringing capital. We are in those deals because we think we can add value to the company's operations, and the founders think we can too. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. There are some funds that are, phenomenal at just adding capital. We are knowledge and capital and relationships. We bring together companies, often, B2B supply chain companies. We are able to bring them together with the customers and people who sit in the seat of somebody who would use their technology, maybe potentially buy their company in the future, because our advisory group were those people before. So we really know how to approach that. Not only is it a Rolodex, but it is a preparation. So we'll work with our companies in preparing their pitches. We will put them together with customers and we'll watch them pitch. It's a big part of our diligence process. But it's a win-win for everyone in the situation because the founder gets to have a customer pitch opportunity, but we get to see the insight. We get to see how they do what they do. And is this something that the larger industry needs and knows that they need? So we really bring a lot more than capital to the table. What is it saying? We act bigger than we are.
No, we're at an interesting time. In fact, I just finished speaking at a private CEO conference. In fact, it's the largest private CEO group. And the theme of my talk was double exponential rate of innovation. So more innovation occurring in the next 5 years. And I say all past human history. And I say it's because this confluence of supercomputing, quantum, chip technologies, biomedical innovation, all accelerated and enhanced with AI and machine learning. And so to what degree then do these tech, industrial IoT, you indicated robotics, of course, and then with foundational robotics would be, some kind of integration with sensors and AI, machine learning. You saw Figure AI come out with their Helix vision, which action model, which is generalizes, and it I thought was quite interesting. You have Unitree, with their home robots, but ag and food is really integrating a lot of these sort of innovations that are happening. To what degree are you a supporter of or believe in this double exponential rate of innovation? Do you think that Kurzweil's idea of the singularity is near, is happening? You saw, Google announced their Willow chip back in December. Then you have the Majorana chip by Microsoft, Ocelot from AWS, Quantinuum, all of them now indicating the near term sort of this unlocking of computational capability. And food is nature based. So a lot of the things that are nature based will be solved, right? So what are your views of all of this transformation that's occurring in tech, and to what degree do you look at that tech, the underlying tech?
Stephen, you nailed it. I think this is the acceleration of this industry right now. And the reason why technology is finally able to disrupt food systems. And I would say that about a few other industries. I think this is the time for AI to disrupt foundational industries. These are industries where there's complex data, which is constantly changing. And before we had these models, it was not cost effective enough for us to be able to do these things. When I talk about automation on farm, we're seeing, we saw 7% of food left unharvested last year on farm, just wasted on the field because we did not have the labor to harvest it. And that problem will only get worse. There is no value proposition to have enough labor to harvest. This needs to be managed by machines. And it's happening now. Now we have incredible automation. So we're invested in a company called Actonomy that does automated tractors. And we are seeing, with the advent of AI and analytics and sensors, a single person being able to man, in a control room, basically, first man of 3 tractors, then 6, now 9. And before that person was driving 1 tractor.
Yes.
Remarkable what they can do. They're absolutely replacing labor. We are seeing now software and advanced APIs being able to sit on the old retail rails that have always existed, and they were never going to be updated. So these are advanced APIs that allow all of these different rails to talk to one another. So Walmart can talk to Nestle, which you would be shocked. The data did not harmonize before. And so there were very limited insights. And now you can say with complete certainty, my delivery system is optimized. My supply is optimized. My demand is crystal clear, and I know which programs are triggering demand. So I'm reducing food waste in the system because I'm never going to let anything lie that shouldn't be sitting on a retail shelf for a week.
Yeah, and with satellite imagery and AI, you can do predictive kind of things in terms of risk mitigation on disaster management, climate prediction, fertilizer use, irrigation, maximizing plant growth. I mean, and on the biomedical side, if you apply it to food, I understand you have some interest in that area. Are you working with the Terrasac Institute of Biomedical Innovation, for example?
Yes, we actually have worked with the Terasaki Institute, less on medical innovation and more on novel proteins, but it's related. But there are phenomenal developments happening around food as medicine, which is how we refer to it. And it captures a lot. That term captures a lot. That there is now a very clear relationship between things like gut biome, immunity, allergies, mental health, but we don't have yet the complete data to say in the model of the human gut, we have millions of bacterial colonies that are acting together. How are they impacted by this input? How long are they impacted by this input? How do we change that? We're getting there, though. We're finally getting there. And this is going to impact everything from preventative medicine to fortifications and just general health, all the way to therapeutics. And there is going to be a whole category that has never been developed before around therapeutics that are naturals.
Yeah, and I guess even food alternatives, rather than growing animals, maybe you can grow meat substitutes, really meat itself in bioreactors. Have you been looking at areas like that?
Absolutely. So cultivated meat is growing meat in a bioreactor. That's where we take cells and we create an ex vivo environment in a tank that basically replicates our bodies, our in vivo environment. And we grow the cells externally, but we grow only what we need. So we just grow the meat and it grows quickly. And then you can harvest that and it is clean, hormone free. It can be made to have higher protein, higher vitamin content. And we're starting to see government approvals for that so that they sell here. In the US, we have Good Meat and Upside Foods, which are approved by the FDA. Now, with this new administration, I'm not sure what the FDA's point of view will be on cultivated meat. And we're going to figure that out in the next pretty soon, in the next month or two. But countries like Singapore, the UK, Israel, they've all approved cultivated meat. And I think in a matter of time, once you see cultivated meat scale and get to real price parity with meat, it will clearly be a necessary solution. Animal agriculture alone is 14% of greenhouse gas emissions. We are deforesting rainforests primarily to grow feed for animals. So it's a problem that needs to stop. And if you just zoom out for a minute and think, okay, what if I am McDonald's Would I rather depend on a farm to grow a cow for 7 years, slaughter it, bring it to me, and then cook that meat? Or would I rather have a tank somewhere in my kitchen and grow my raw ingredients myself and have complete control over my supply chain? I think the latter is the better business solution.
Are you looking at investments in the plant space as well, and then also insects as a food source, or not?
Well, we absolutely have looked at plant-based foods, plant-based meats. I think that we're going to continue to grow that industry, particularly with mushrooms as a great alternative. Mass fermentation is it's kind of how they refer to it, but we have not looked deeply at insects, and I think insects are a phenomenal source of protein, but I think they will be a phenomenal source of protein primarily for pet feed. I don't think human consumption. I don't think we're mentally there yet.
Yeah. So there are countries in Southeast Asia where it's accepted, right? Where insects as a food source. So
That's true. That's true. But I think for the vast majority, particularly of the West, it's it's going to be a tough sell.
you mentioned mushrooms. There's an interest in sort of the therapeutic impact of mushrooms, together with the fact that it could be a food source and it could be processed in a way that could fit a number of dietary requirements. Have you looked at that aspect, sort of the therapeutic aspects of different kinds of mushrooms, or not?
But we've looked at the therapeutic aspects of all bioactives, mushrooms included. Actually, in this space, we've seen I would call it the proteinification of food happen in the last 20 years, 10 years plus. I think now the next major way bioactives are going to be kind of advancing human health will be in the fiberification of food. And I think plants are going to be the driver of that.
When you investigate all of the different kind of ecosystems out there, um, do you look at some of the sort of broader aspects of plants that, there's this idea that maybe there's computation happening in plants and they can work as sensing systems, and maybe our traditional kind of definition of what intelligence is, maybe this is a little bit too out of the box, but our definition of thinking that there has to be neurons for computation to happen. And then there's this recent paper that came out that they can see computation happening at the molecular level in cells. There's some learning occurring. So do you get into those areas, or are those too esoteric, do you think?
We're not deeply in those areas yet. What we are seeing is plants are incredible bioreactors. Their cells are very powerful and a great way to grow things that are not necessarily what they typically have. So there is a category of alternative protein called molecular farming, where you grow proteins inside a plant cell, and that is very cool. Instead of growing the seed to harvest and feed the cow and grow the cow to slaughter the cow to get your protein, why not just grow your protein? And so there are companies out there who are able to edit plant genes so that you have a soybean that grows casein, which is the protein in cow's milk. And so you can have cheese from a product or from your soybean.
We talked about insects, and let's say they're not widely accepted from a food source for humans, but they are can be used as a food source for animal feed and things like that. And so that can address some of the kind of issues with regards to traditional ways of feeding animals. I guess the other thing too is that insects can be used for waste management, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking,
So there is a big category of growing category where we're seeing insects basically break down waste by bio waste for the most part, and that there is a that's still somewhat of a nascent industry, but we have eyes on it. We think that there's potential there. That's all a part of this view around with circular economy.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I just did an interview this morning with a winner of a contest, the World Innovation Technology Services Alliance, which represents 90% of the tech industry, did their inaugural World Cup. I happened to judge it last year, and in fact, keynoted their conference, and um, a team out of Malaysia actually came in second place, and they're called Intimo, but they use these black sergeant flies, or these flies.
Soldier flies. Soldier flies.
Yeah, soldier flies, and they can use it to eat organic waste, so to handle that aspect. And then from the larva casings, there seems to be some kind of a medical benefit that they're looking at. And then the waste products from the larvae can be used for animal feed, which is interesting. So every aspect of this can be used, right? Waste conversion to byproducts that can be used for animal feed, to casing can be maybe has some medical benefits for humans, things like that. Are those areas of interest, or maybe it's a little bit too early yet?
We're keeping an eye on those areas. I think there's opportunity there, but it is young. It's young. But the circular economy it's very real. The biggest challenge with circular economy companies is that they generally need to be somewhat regional because you cannot transport the different byproducts effectively. But they can still grow to be incredibly large businesses in a region. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. We waste 1/3 of our food, and there is, I think, it is food waste is they say it's the third largest country. It would be the third largest country of greenhouse gas emissions. So how we tackle that problem is, still kind of the jury's still out on all the best ways to do it. But we are using technology and biology to address this problem. It is an enormous problem. And the people who solve it will be incredibly big financial winners. Because you're taking something that has no value or potentially negative value and you're assigning value to it.
Now, if you were to predict 3 years out, what do you see on the edge that you think is interesting, maybe a little bit too early, but you think holds great promise out there? Or it could be 5 things, but it's like quantum computing, right? You see all of this sort of things that are happening, not food related, but maybe has food capabilities in some way over areas, but specifically in the food and the ag area. If you're to look out 5 years, it's still on the edge, maybe a little bit too early, but you think, you know what, it's really interesting. And we think it holds great promise. Or maybe that's your competitive edge, and you don't talk about what's on the edge.
I'm happy to talk about my predictions. My job is to look into the future. And that's what I think about all day. And I think when we look 5+ years out, I think farming will be largely autonomous and it will be driven by data. And that will allow us to grow our food incredibly efficiently, water efficiently, chemically efficiently, labor efficiently, so that healthy, nutritious food will be much more accessible and inexpensive. I also think that we will have more metro adjacent growing, so we're not flying food all over the world. So I think that will be a big change in how we grow our food. Right now, we still, the big modernization with irrigation was going from spray irrigation to drip irrigation. We don't monitor this yet in math, and we can do that, and we can measure the soil and see what is actually needed, so we can input exactly what plants need to grow, and we can use satellite imagery to predict that in industrial scale. So I think that is going to be our big next step on agriculture. I think for human health, it will, I'm very, very big on gut biome. I think the gut biome is going to be the gateway to so much health. I think we have, collectively as a society, let our gut biomes basically fall apart, and they can no longer do the job that they're supposed to do, being the the filter layer between us and the world, and what we eat. And it's led to mass inflammation, which has led to lifelong disease, lifestyle disease. And I think a healthy gut biome will improve those health outcomes for us as a society. So I think that will develop, and that correlation will become crystal clear with the advent of AI being able to, measure and manage and look at the 3D imagery of the gut biome to see how everything affects itself and changes.
You saw Denis Hassabis with his colleagues the Nobel Prize in chemistry for his work on how amino acids roll into proteins. Or kind of very human-centric, but it doesn't have to be human-centric. I mean, proteins are everywhere, right? And have applications for the environment, definitely there'll be applications from a food standpoint. Have you looked at some of that work and potentially where it hits with food and health and things like that? So I know that now they're working on at the cellular level, so expanding beyond how amino acids fold into the 3D protein structures. If you understand that structure, you have all sorts of applications, even in things like for the environment, renewable energy, curing chemistry, together with healthcare. I mean, it's just really millions of different kinds of applications. But if you expand on that, and in synthetic proteins, there's a new molecule, the ESM3, where you can predict a protein structure of a protein that never existed before, and then you can synthesize it. And then you can then maybe use that in conjunction with ag tech or something like that. Have you looked at that area at all, or are you curious about that area?
Synthetic biology is a very big part of both ag tech and food tech. So yes, we've looked deeply at it. Yeasts are very powerful little organisms that are able to grow a lot of what we can produce, or what we can design, these kind of designer proteins. And that's primarily how we produce with synthetic biology. And this is driving change in how we create fertilizers, how we create pesticides. It's a whole class called biologics, which is competing with chemical synthetics, and they're much better for the world. So far, there's a big company called Pivot Bio that is, really making waves, and the farmers are able to replace, north of 10% of their chemical fertilizer with Pivot Bio's biological, and it's just as effective. We need to scale this up and up and up. If you have biologics, they don't create runoff, they don't create chemical harm. So these are solutions. These are the solutions of the future. But even the best solution now is only, slightly over a 10% replacement. So it's a young industry, but a very bright industry.
So Are there areas that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to sort of discuss? And so that's the next question. Then I have another one after this. So it's like an open greenfield sort of topic area. Is there something you want to bring up that we haven't discussed yet?
Good. Well, we covered a lot of things. What else would we like to discuss? So another area that we are excited about, which is sort of related to these advancements in agriculture and using tools like synthetic biology and these biologicals, is greenhouses. The controlled environment agriculture world is growing at nearly 20% CAGR. It's growing very fast. And it's because as climate change impacts agriculture, we need to add more and more kind of covered agricultural structures to grow our food. And as populations move into urban metros, increasingly dense urban metros, we need to have urban adjacent growing. And that is primarily done in in controlled environment form. So I think that we're going to see a tremendous amount in terms of advancements in greenhouses, and you will see many, many more greenhouses all over the world, because we'll have growing in places like the Middle East, which otherwise you couldn't grow in before. And technology is really what's allowing for that to happen. We have technologies that are able to distill the solar rays that are going into a greenhouse so that you use the right bandwidth to grow the produce inside, and you take the rest and you convert it into solar energy to power the greenhouses. It's amazing what we're able to do right now. And then you can do a tremendous amount of testing inside greenhouses because it's a controlled environment. So it's a place where you'll see the cutting edge of growing. So we'll be able to make more nutritious produce. And those are society changing. If you think about what happened in South Asia with golden rice, that changed nutrition for most of India. And I think we'll see those types of changes happen.
So this is related to what, vertical farms then? Or vertical?
No, vertical farming. That does fall under the category of controlled environment, but we are much bigger believers in just traditional greenhouses.
Oh, that's interesting. So, the UN and the World Food Program and people like that, do you work with them at all? And, they have their own accelerator. They've done about 90 million in grant funding for innovations and portfolios, so non-dilutive. They have their own incubator, accelerator. Are you working with any of those kind of agencies at all?
We're not working directly with any of the UN programs. We know and are close to UN Foundation, and we work with them in terms of funders for programs like this and connecting the dots. But we currently don't work directly with the UN programs. If you would like to connect me with them, I'd love to chat and meet the companies that they're supporting.
Yeah, two of them won the Earthshot Prize over a year ago now, which is the $1 million impact prize. Two of the portfolio companies, but they're constantly innovating. They're using autonomous vehicles now. That's with the German government in partnership. Definitely using satellite imagery and
for carbon and methane emissions, and I think that's how we're going to get real carbon credits in the hands of farmers.
Yeah, and then also in logistics and optimizing logistics, and then seeing how do you optimize potential disaster areas and things like that to mitigate, food security issues. They do a lot of innovation, and of course they have their own data science team as well. Well, I mean, the CP Group would be one that would be a good partner for you because they're one of the largest food groups in the world. So the last question is, and we're down to our last few minutes, is what kind of recommendations you want to leave the audience and or questions you want to leave the audience?
Recommendations or questions for the audience? Well, in terms of your personal health and food, I would recommend to the audience that they be mindful of things. We didn't discuss this, but things that potentially contain microplastics. I think we're going to learn a lot about the harm of plastic. And eat a lot of fiber, more than you think you need. I think we are all very, not just low, but missing the fiber in our diet. And you can, at this point, try to understand what probiotics and prebiotics are going to make you feel healthier or better, but just feed all of the gut biome. Give them some great fiber and it will stay healthy. So that sleep is everything. And I would love to ask the audience, as we have in the US this new administration that seems to care very, very deeply about chemical inputs, just harmful inputs into our food system, from agriculture to ingredients. How interesting is that for you? How exciting is that for you? Because that, if the US can just at a minimum meet the EU on their standards here, that would create a huge tailwind for the food system to invest in itself.
So those are very thoughtful questions and sort of recommendations to the audience as well, and really for the good of the planet and all life in a sense as well, right? So really, I mean, thank you for coming in and sharing so many different insights and also predicting the future. I can see how your early days, being from an immigrant family who stressed, some of the traditional kinds of ways of doing well in America, and then how you sort of converted that into a love for science, but also love for business, and then impact in food as being sort of fundamental to everybody on the planet. I could see all of this working in profound ways, and of course now the founding general partner Rethink. So just an amazing history, and thank you for all the contributions you're making.
Thank you for having me, Stephen, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.